I'm going to pause it now.
Good evening, folks. We're calling to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Water Board of Directors. Can I get a roll call?
Yes, good evening. Vice President Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Larry Russell, Director Matt Sampson,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
and President Monty Schmidt.
Here. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
Second.
Are there any public comments on the closed session items only?
There are none.
Okay, thank you, Terry. With that, can we get a vote?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
And President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we are going to convene to closed session and we'll return at 6:30. Okay, we are reconvening from our closed session with no reportable actions. And with that, let's see here. Do we have any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Yes, we have a few. I want to remind the public that they have up to 3 minutes. And let me go ahead and turn on our timer. And I will start with Mr. Ed Jamison, Roger Roberts, and then Clayton Smith. Go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Hi, thanks. Last week, the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting recapped the district's conservation programs. Not including additional significant customer costs, the Laundry to Landscape program costs $5,000 an acre foot, or well over $10,000 an acre foot if the cost estimate has not been updated for conservation consultant Medouse's November corrections. And the Rain Barrel program costs $8,800 an acre foot. Counseling on residential landscaping costs an estimated $13,700 an acre foot. The trivial water savings from the Laundry to Landscape and the Rain Barrel programs led Medouse to recommend that they be deleted from the district's water conservation element plan. Last year, it was stated that compliance with the district's 2016 gray water ordinance was only 10%, with 90% of customers declaring gray water to be infeasible. At that time, a former board member suggested that more robust enforcement efforts might be appropriate. The district retained a consultant for advice on how to force more compliance, and last November 1st, MMWD implemented a more robust and presumably still more costly process to review customers' declarations of gray water non-feasibility. The gray water ordinance should never have been implemented. The water savings are trivial, and the cost both to the district and to affected customers is unacceptably high. Last week, it was suggested that the board could require something akin to a Las Vegas landscape for any new water hookups. This would be Orwellian Big Brother overreach well beyond the district's charter to provide safe and reliable water. In a September 21st, 2021 presentation, conservation expert Peter Mayer showed that MMWD's per capita conservation spending grotesquely exceeds that of even major arid districts. The district appears to have implemented conservation programs at any cost. The board needs to rescind the 2016 gray water ordinance and scrap the wasteful and ineffective Laundry to Landscape and Rain Barrel programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jamison. Mr. Roger Roberts, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
There was some interesting article in the IJ today about legislative action relative to water rights. And it's not clear to me whether or not the water district is still interested in pursuing water rights as part of its long-term strategy for water resiliency. If it is the case that you are still keeping that on the table, I'd be interested in whether or not the water district is going to have a meeting that will be devoted to that question and hear what your position might be on the legislation that's on the table in Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Clayton Smith.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Once again, I
I noticed we had a light bit of atmospheric aerosoling over the weekend, and here we are Tuesday, and we had a little bit of rain here, right here in Mill Valley in June, here out of the blue. And it was totally unanticipated by anyone in the weather service going forward if you went back a week ago. So that's something to note. Another thing too is the abnormal decline in temperature for June. And we're down, I think, about 8 degrees on average per day over the last, as I counted, at least the last 6 weeks, which must have some impact on the evaporation rates on your reservoir, which is a question that I think I raised one time before. It would be a bit of additional information that would add to this comment that I've been making about the aerosoling, because it's intended to cool the atmosphere. And so this might be something to look into also. The other thing, though, I think is the most important is what happened last week or 2 weeks ago at what was probably the first really well-attended meeting by the public, the general public, at any of the water board meetings that I've seen, at least for the last year, and probably since the COVID pandemic was rolled out. And the way the public was treated at the meeting, which was, I think, one of the most, it was the strangest thing I saw. We ended up, the meeting closed at 9:30. Everybody was out the door, almost like on a time clock. Meanwhile, the public was basically squeezed into these 1-minute slots with the cowbell going on and then the little buzzer. It was really, I think, kind of an embarrassment. I think it also is something that in the future is going to act as a discouragement from further public participation in your meetings. And this one particularly, when the most unprecedented large increase in water rates were put before the public, and they were so abused in their comments on them. Ring your bell now. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah. And yeah, why don't you find another way to signal your impatience? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, with that, do we have any directors or general managers announcements? I'm going to start. I'll go to my right, Matt, and Ranjit.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Just 2 quick announcements. One, last month on the 20th, on the Saturday, we were graced with our Assembly member, Damon Connolly's presence with his colleagues from the Assembly out on the watershed to do a tour. We were joined by Marin Wildfire's Mark Brown and Ann Kraylock, Danny Franco from One Tam, and then Sean and our staff from the watershed came out and took a look at some of the work we're doing in the wildfire sphere and forest management, forest health, specifically around San Geronimo treatment. And we're able to identify a lot of work that needs to be done and funding that needs to accompany that. So very grateful that those folks took their time to come out and take a look at what we're doing and then see what needs to be done. And for our staff, for, of course, represent us extremely well in that sphere. So thank you. And then last Friday on the 2nd, attended the Lagunitas TAC meeting and got to see a lot of good updates on the work that's being done specifically with Marin Water. So Paul and your staff for the great presentations. And thank you very much for continuing to engage that group, specifically around the stream release automation, which I think we'll hear about tonight. And then the potential to raise dams and what that's going to do to the impact of the creek. So it's important that we continue to engage that group. So thank you for that. And then also to Eric Etlinger and the fisheries crew for their work and the really promising data they're putting back from this year's streams, specifically around the fish. And then also the work they're doing around the tagging or monitoring of that. So some really great work being done as always. And it was really good to highlight in the public sphere. So thank you to everybody for that.
Thank you. Ranjit.
Thanks, and hello, everyone. I do have 2 quick items. The first is our report from the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting that we held last Tuesday on May 30th. Carrie Pollard and Adrian Mertens, together with our consultant Peter Mayer from Water DM, provided a really comprehensive 2-hour overview of the water efficiency program with 5 highlights that I want to point out. One is our district's incentive programs, including gray water and rainwater, the Flume Smart Home Water Monitor Program, and toilet replacement program. Data that Peter Mayer showed from the Flume program was really interesting, and I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to go back to the presentation to take a look at some of the data around our water usage here coming from Flume. Second point was we provided committee feedback on policy and regulations, including future changes to the district's gray water ordinance and non-functional turf ordinance. I expect we'll be seeing those coming to the board. Third is we covered water efficiency and community engagement programs and activities. Number 4, we reviewed planned target market research and campaign development plan for the water efficiency programs over the next several months, which were really, I thought, quite innovative in the way that we're segmenting out different customer groups to determine what types of messaging are most effective with each of the population segments. Fifth point is we provided an update of the water efficiency master plan. The draft plan is scheduled to be completed in the summer and fall of 2023, and the final plan is scheduled to be completed in the fall of 2023 as well. Second item is the North Bay Watershed Association held a board meeting on Friday, June 2nd. There were 2 presentations on programs to respond to local sea level rise, one regional program and one program focused on neighborhoods in the San Rafael Canal area. And it brought up the question for me regarding the degree to which our water supply infrastructure might be susceptible to sea level rise in those neighborhoods. I don't know if that's something that we need to be thinking about going forward. In addition, there was a really interesting report from Sonoma County Water Agency representative that told us their new FIRO, or Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations program, allowed them to maintain an additional 30,000 acre feet in their reservoirs this winter, which normally they would have spilled for flood control. Now they sell about 40 to 45,000 acre feet in a year. So this is, equivalent to having a new reservoir up in Sonoma just through using data for better water management. Very impressive. That's it.
Wow, great. Thank you. Jed?
Yeah, thank you. I feel badly that I was not able to make the Communications and Conservation Committee meeting. I really wanted to be there. I reviewed it and it was super well done. I'm impressed by the amount of work this team is doing. My flight got triple delayed and I got grounded. So I really apologize. That was an important meeting for me. And I'm impressed with the progress, and I look forward to the next stages in getting that master plan through, and hope we can have as much community engagement as possible as we think it through and get broader buy-in and ambassadorship. I also think it's important to note that, we did announce the grant that we recently received, $6.4 million. That's been publicized as a great article on the IJ. Great work, Ben, for what you did to help make that happen, to help bring some level of repair to our underserved communities. And they are and have been not served as well as they should be. And I think we did a great job here for the canal, for Marin City. And I think it's just a beginning, and I look forward to working with you on other programs like that. The FAC, Finance Administration Committee meeting, met on May 25th. And the Human Resources Department, Vicky, provided a great update with all of the departments, areas that we were focusing on, including Marin Water's flexible staffing program and recent staff promotions. Staff provided also background information on the board approval process for filling vacancies, as we have many to fill. And this is probably the most important thing we're doing this year as we rebuild and rehire for a new set of folks to come in and help us for the decades to come. The discussion continued from our previous conversation on February 20th FAC meeting We also received a financial update from Brett with the monthly financial plan, our quarterly investment report, which on March 23rd showed that we had a current carried market value of $68.7 million. And then the public, if you want to review the meeting, you can look at our presentation online for the May 25th FAC meeting that can be found at marinwater.org/calendar. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
In answer to your question, Ranjiv, the district did a full survey of tidal impacts. So all of the nearshore facilities have been ID'd, and I don't know about addressed, but at least they've been looked at. I found that presentation quite interesting too. I didn't actually realize this, but there's a berm around the canal. And without that berm, it would be sometimes 2 feet deep in there. And so that berm is doing a lot. And, you know, it brings home where I live, which is on a single family home marina. And we're probably +6 or something like that. They were talking about +8 tides. So that's where it gets exciting when you get into those kind of numbers, because that means water in the street. Now, we haven't experienced that yet, but where my daughter lives, which is the next community up across from Marin Country Day School, that one does flood with the tides. So this is a really serious issue in Marin, particularly in the Tiburon Peninsula, because we have just 2 roads coming in. Both of them have low spots, one at the fire station in Corte Madera, East Corte Madera, the other one over by Blackie's pasture. They both dip down there, and it will get exciting. It was a quite well done presentation on what's going to happen. And the canal is in an interesting area. They kind of brushed it off. They said, well, it's the Target parking lot, so it's, you know, whatever. As long as it floods there, it's okay. But it's coming. But like I say, I think the water district's in pretty good shape on this issue. I think we've hardened a few places. And if you go to places like El Pollo Loco, you can see some of it. They have a dam around the restaurant. So they're thinking about it, you know, and moving forward. They don't always implement it the smoothest way. It's kind of difficult for ADA access, but it does do the job of keeping the water away from the facility. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Ben?
I didn't have an item. I was just going to reflect on the discussion of sea level rise in our facilities. One thing to think about, water facilities compared, for example, to wastewater are really in a much better position. And the reason for that is our pipes are under pressure. So as you get sea level rise, you don't get inundation of seawater into our system, unlike wastewater pipes, where it's a major issue. Similarly, treatment plants, typically wastewater facilities are on the lowest point because it's all gravity flow. Our treatment plants are up on the mountain, so they're well protected. And generally, our tanks and pump stations are in higher elevation. So for the most part, water systems don't have the risk that we think about for most infrastructure. So just a tidbit to think about.
Also keep in mind that CSMA, the treatment plant over here, gets so much salt water intrusion that the water cannot be used without treatment to second as a purple pipe water. The shopping center over here is all double plumbed, anticipating the water coming up from that plant, which never happened. And you'll find the developers get a little pushy about that issue, saying, you know, we spent all that money and you never brought the water to us. So that salt issue, especially at CSMA, I have talked with them at length about doing something about it, addressing the infiltration. And they're thinking about it, but the sewers there are like 25 feet deep, and it just pours into their sewers. Raises their salt level by 4 times what it should be. Something like, it's like 2,500 TDS, it should be about 600 based on Las Colinas and those places. That's why Las Colinas' recycle has been there. And don't forget, Las Colinas ribbon cutting is this Thursday. So it's a good thing to go to.
That's a good point. Thank you, Larry. Okay, nothing else then from you, Ben?
No.
Okay, all right, then we'll move on to our consent calendar. Can I get a motion to adopt our consent calendar?
Excuse me, so moved.
Second.
Is there any public comment on our consent calendar items?
There are none.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, can
Good.
we get,
I did have one other quick item I wanted to share with the board. Thanks for the reminder, Paul. We did get a letter from Sonoma Water confirming this one-time allowance that we asked for, where we're going to pay for our minimum by July 1, but we'll be able to use it post as long as we use that additional water the next calendar year, the next fiscal year, starting July 1. So I'm super appreciative to Grant and their board for, it's big money. We'll be around maybe 45 to 48 100 acre feet, somewhere around there. So there's still about 500 acre feet that we won't have to pay for and not benefit from.
that's great news for that flexibility, and I agree, it's a great step forward in maybe updating our approach to how we partner. Just a quick question. So with the leave behind water, or the water that we're leaving behind for the time being, if there's a wet year, or does our, I don't know, how will that be treated? How?
Yeah, so here's probably how it would play out if it's a wet year. We'll be aggressively taking it as we are now through the summer. And maybe by the time it gets super wet, we will have taken our minimum, the 5,200 plus this additional, whatever it is, 500, and then it'll all spill over. So, but again, that's not bad, because our reservoirs would be full if that's the case. So we won't really benefit unless it's on the dry side, but I'll take the wet if that's what plays out.
What's the status of the North Marin pipeline?
The aqueduct and the landslide. I don't know. Why don't
I don't either. We were in a meeting. Rick Freitas was at the meeting, and I meant to ask about it, but I forgot. And he didn't bring it up.
Well, why don't we plan to bring it maybe under GM comments
that'd be
next
great.
time and just give a brief update?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, back onto our consent calendar. Terry, there are no comments on the consent calendar?
That is correct. There are none on the consent. So Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Hi.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank
Okay, that brings us on to our regular calendar item, excuse me, number 8, update on our water resiliency roadmap. And Paul and Crystal, that's going to be the two of you. Thank you.
It's the Crystal and Paul show. Good evening, Paul Saleh, Water Resources Director. And we do have a short presentation for you this evening on the update for our water supply resiliency. So let me see if I can manage the technology in the next few seconds here. I think I need to share my screen. Hooray. And then take my glasses off so everybody's smiling, and we can get going. Okay, so since February 28th, staff have been working towards implementation of the roadmap projects. And this evening, we'll give a quick sort of reminder to folks what the roadmap is, projects that are included, and what we've been up to, specifically since the last update, which was in April. So just sort of a brief update on the projects, and we'll get started with the early action projects before moving into the longer term projects, concluding with sort of summary and next steps. So our roadmap has a number of early action projects that are the Electrify Sula-Huli, the Phoenix to Bontempi connection, and you'll be hearing more about those from Crystal and the work that her team's been doing on those. the forecasting and stream release automation work that Director Sampson mentioned. We chatted with the Lagunitas TAC last Friday. And then a quick look at just a brief look at the water loss study that we're just getting started on. We'll also just a quick note on the operational strategy before getting into those longer term projects on conveyance and storage. And of course,
Paul, on this slide, I find when I'm speaking to this with, interested constituents, it's always hard, I realize I can't really delineate between the, say, a infrastructure development activity, say, the actual development of the new supply versus then the benefits of having that supply. I'm wondering if there's some way to indicate at what point it comes online.
Right. So with this particular slide, we've tried to show when it comes online, kind of at the beginning of the shaded area. So if we were to look at Sulahuili and Phoenix, it's showing, somewhere around 2025 that those would be online.
I should probably have known that. But
this is a complex set of information that we're probably squeezed too much into one slide. And so maybe there's a better way that we could take a look at representing.
I was going to, since we're doing what we usually do, which is raise good points right along the way and have a great discussion, which is what we should do. I think that it would be really helpful if we could actually break out the early action items into a separate calendar so that that we could really not get lost in a 20-year timeline on the bottom, but really break it out so that maybe it's over a 3 or 4 year time frame, so we can really see those early first projects, which are extremely important and where we've really made a commitment to make a difference in a short period of time, that we can see the milestones and progress in a higher relief. And I think knowing when we have actually brought online that additional water is a really big milestone and an important point. And I think in that way, be able to see these things in greater relief, because it is an important part of the focus of our commitment to make something happen in a short time frame. And then that'll also give us more room to maybe break out the longer term projects and be able to speak about them in two separate bundles, I think would help.
We'll take a look at how to do that. Thanks.
Quick, Paul, I think AMI, we're clear that is not implementation. That's the benefits of it over time is what's on that chart, right? Implementation is much earlier.
The benefits start at the beginning.
Yeah. But the implementation would end before 2045, we're thinking.
I think it starts. Yes, it would. Yes,
Okay.
yes, well before 2045.
And one, a small note, but I think water efficiency programs is better than water conservation in terms of a title, but that's probably an internal thing for you guys to figure out. But I think it may be better received.
We'll take a look at it. Yeah. So that covers this slide. Thank you. So much for a quick presentation. No, it's great. It's a good discussion. So our early action. So the stream flow automation project, I think the board is familiar with, but just briefly, we release water from both Kent Reservoir and from Sulahuili Reservoir to support fisheries below the dam. And there's a release requirement and sort of a pattern of water releases that we follow throughout the year. Currently, it's a very manual process where we're looking at USGS websites and calling into the Ops Center to affect changes in the stream flow, which is measured by a USGS stream gauge. And there's a big time delay between the time when we make the call to adjust the valve and the time at which we see an actual change in the flow. So what we see on the inset here is an example of just that, changes in flow. And you can see the sort of straight dashed line at the bottom of the chart. That's the sort of idealized requirement that we have to meet. And of course, as we're changing the flow on the sort of left portion of the graph, we're shooting below where we really would like to be, and then kind of bouncing up above it a little bit. And we think that there's a way for us to control this a little bit better. So we put a team together. It's, projects like this always seem very straightforward, but it's actually quite a multidisciplinary team. If you might imagine, we have folks working on controls. We've got Andy Collison from ESA helping us, with effects in the creek, along with right? We've just engaged with the Lagunitas TAC, who have a wealth of resources there. I started writing down the NGOs associated with the TAC at that meeting, and I think I lost count at about 25 different NGOs. It was pretty impressive. So there's a lot of resources to take advantage of there. So we look forward to that. And then within our own Marin Water, we have a number of folks who are well suited to help us with this work. So we feel good about the team that we've got to put together, and are looking forward to kind of getting started.
Well, I just want to make a note on this. You know, we talk about how innovation might improve operations, and sometimes when we see something, like, we forget that this is actually a pretty innovative use of emerging technologies that allow us to manage our water more effectively.
Yeah.
I just want to flag that it's very similar to new tech, AMI, or, you know, leak sensors and detectors. It's a really interesting thing, and I you know, putting it in our newsletter, you know, under, you know, leveraging innovation for effective water management, I think it would serve us well.
And I think along that lines, it's because of what the graphic that you just showed, it's not just a water, it doesn't just necessarily generate new water by not over releasing. It also makes us more compliant by, you know, the challenges of making sure we don't under release. And so I think highlighting those two factors, I think also involving the Lagunitas TAC and the benefit of having in one form a really educated group of people who can provide a lot of feedback on the health and management of our watershed and help us write grants and get grants and do a lot of other wonderful things. That's a really important resource, because I think with integrating that group in this process to see that we're trying to really be good stewards and that this generates a positive outcome for our conservation as well as our water is a really big win-win. So like, I really appreciate this. And I think it's a really important thing for us to highlight.
Thanks. Yeah. So, you know, when we talk about this project, what physically are we talking about? And we sort of see in the picture here in the yellow circle, that's the existing USGS kind of communications box, if you like. And we'll need to grab some information out of that by installing our own box. And then from there, it'll be cell modem back to the district, most likely. And that's how we'll grab the data into our SCADA system. So there, you know, and it sounds so easy when I say it in 25 seconds, but I will need rights of way associated with, you know, the national park. And there'll just be there's a lot of coordination, you know, just in this slide alone, you're looking at USGS, the parks, and a number of other folks that are going to be involved to make this happen.
There's power there,
There is, but of course we'll need to run a drop and get our own meter.
but the hard part, heavy lifting's done.
Yeah. And so this is just sort of the short list of coordination efforts, and we've already started and engaged most of these folks. We've met with USGS out at the site. We're talking with state parks. Sean's group was able to put us in touch with folks out there. And then, of course, we have, and this slide shows, right, at Lagunitas Creek is just not some static creek. There's stuff going on, good stuff going on out there. And so we need to be conscious that if we're going to be installing some physical piece of infrastructure in the creek, that we're not going to do it, in this case, in a location where that creek might be modified. So we need to coordinate our activities closely with a number of folks. So our schedule then, we did just sort of just noted on here, met last Friday with Lagunitas Technical Advisory Committee. We're hoping to have the new stream gauge installed this fall. And then we'll be grabbing that data, as I just described, back to our SCADA system at about that time. And then it'll take us, you know, a year and a bit, maybe a bit more, to kind of calibrate that new stream gauge. And then, so the project won't be complete until 2024. And even at that time, you know, will we be ready to sort of let the reins go and let it go on an automated process? And probably not. We'll probably spend a couple more years really closely monitoring how well this does. So it's an interesting project, but it's going to be challenging for sure. Okay, so then I mentioned briefly optimizing supplemental water. So this is the sort of balance that we were talking about just a moment ago with the water that we're not taking this year that we'll be using next year. In a way, we're trying to minimize our costs and sort of also at the same time minimize our risk. And those two are kind of opposed. So we need to find a sort of sweet spot. And we think while recognizing we're not going to be correct every year, in other words, there's no perfect solution here, but we're going to try to find a solution where maybe we're going to be more correct and we're wrong. That's sort of what we're talking about here. Later this evening, there's an item for Woodard and Kern to amend their contract, and they'll be the ones who'll be helping us think through this process. And so at that point, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal. She can give us an update on her team's activities.
Okay, so 2 of the early action items have been moved over to engineering, planning, and design. The first one is Phoenix Lake, pump station from Phoenix Lake to Bontempe. So design is currently evaluating 3 different routes, as we mentioned previously, from Phoenix Lake to Bontempe Lake. And each of these alternatives will require upsizing of the existing 50 horsepower barge pump that's in the lake, as well as installation of a new raw water pump station and approximately 4,000 feet of transmission pipe. We'll also need a new PG&E service drop. All the routes would finish by going through a tunnel at the top of the hill that's 1,200 feet long and 8 feet in diameter. And we're currently planning to send a robotic vehicle in there to make sure there's no structural integrity issues. And then we're going to send people in there to take a look, but that's where the pipe would end. All 3 routes would go through that tunnel at some point. Currently, the team is thinking that alternative 2 is the preferred alternative to the existing, because there's an existing gatehouse with a PG&E drop at this peak at the top of this blue line here. But that's all going to, of course, be dependent on environmental analysis, which we still have to get through. So the purpose of the project is to improve our efficiency so that we'd allow us to more frequently utilize the water from Phoenix Lake and pump it up to Bontempe. So looking at a higher level for the project, some of the actions that we've been undertaking and currently pursuing is that we've been meeting with the county to discuss feasibility of a multi-benefit project for flood control and water supply. And we're working on an MOU to memorialize the project collaboration, and we'll be bringing that back to the board shortly for consideration. We're also in the process of onboarding a consultant to assist with scoping for the multi-benefit project. And we've done a thorough document review of past studies. There's a number of geotechnical studies and hydrologic studies that have been done over the years. And we're starting to dig into those to look at the project assumptions, which differ slightly from the project goals today. So this consultant will help us out with reviewing those studies to determine a basis of design and a sizing for the pump station. They're also going to be helping with electrical design and civil design work. Now, there's a new aspect of the project that we're going to be looking at, and that's pump storage. It's a new aspect of the project. So we're looking at the feasibility of pumping up to Bontempe during the day when power is abundant from alternative power supplies, such as solar, and then bringing the water down to Phoenix through and generating power through a turbine at a time at night when the power is less available. So this aspect of the project has some really exciting funding opportunities as well, as you can imagine. So we're starting to look into that. We're beginning the feasibility.
How much power are you talking about?
Good question. 12-inch, 600-foot head. You'd have to do the numbers on the horsepower for that and the kilowatt hours that you could produce. Yeah, so that study will be ongoing. We've submitted the application for the new PG&E service drop, and we're in the 16-week queue to even get started on that analysis.
Crystal,
And- yes.
This is an area of global interest, pumped storage hydropower.
Mhm.
I'm really excited that you're moving forward with this.
Yeah, it's very
And
exciting.
I wonder down the road if there will be other opportunities, for example, between Alpine Lake and Kent Lake, any place where we have a height differential between our reservoirs that might be large enough to implement this system.
Mhm. And I should note, we do have an ongoing study with UC Davis to look at micro hydro turbines through even within our distribution system from tanks, from storage tanks down, and even at Kent Lake and the discharges that we do from Kent Lake. So that's an ongoing study.
Aren't we still using the one on the Fairfax line? I thought we had substituted in a hydropower for the pressure reducing valve.
Believe that was the preferred location for such a installation, but I don't think we did not to put it in yet. Yeah. Okay, so finally, we're looking at a number of funding opportunities for the project. One of the most recent one that we've come across is a USBR small storage grant. In order to apply for that grant, the notice of intent that we're going to have to submit this fall, we have to prepare a feasibility study, and we are contracting and negotiating with a consultant now on scope to put that feasibility study together for that grant application. And then, of course, WRDA, we've mentioned that several times. We're working with Congressman Huffman's office in order to help push that application forward for funding.
Is there more Giardia in Phoenix? There's a lot
Giardia.
more critters, like the turtles and.
Like all small lakes, it's susceptible late summer. Yeah.
And are we doing anything about that? I mean, like you think about chlorinating the line going up or?
No is the short answer. I think our analysis is that it's a relatively small volume of water in comparison. So there's I believe, an old adage about the solution.
Crystal, can I ask one question on this project? So a lot of really interesting, I guess, advances on what are potentially going on. Will those delay this to the point where it's going to be kicked past the short-term solutions? Like if we're looking at these new opportunities, does this now delay this project 5-6 years down the road, and then no longer is the short-term piece? Because I think it's an important piece to clue into, because the design of this plan was really to address a certain amount of water in a certain amount of years. And I like this stuff. I wonder if we could add it in later, if that makes sense.
If I could jump in briefly on that, Director Sampson. The idea of a multi-benefit water and stormwater project has been around for a long time. And now that we're moving forward, the county, when we initially, Crystal and our folks started to talk to them, they were very interested. We've been clear to them that we need to move forward for water supply, and we can't let a churn happen in terms of your decision-making to delay the project. So that is where it would happen. And we are vigilant to that. If it turns out that it is a viable, and there's questions on that, if it is a viable stormwater project that would delay it, we would bring it back to the board, and really a policy decision on, could be a 2-year delay, but you know, that sort of thing. At this point, it's I wouldn't wager that it plays out successfully as a stormwater project for a number of reasons, including the size and location for that large watershed, but that's yet to be determined.
Would the pumps be big enough to make a difference? I mean, one of the he's talking about is you got to get rid of water fast. When they decide it's going to rain, they need the storage. That means you got to empty the lake.
Yeah, the core challenge is it's relatively small. So to give them the capacity in the middle of a, you know, back-to-back atmospheric rivers, it has to be drained down very quickly. So the sizing just kind of becomes exponentially beyond what we would need, and that cost would fall on the county to upsize it from a 5 MGD to a 30 MGD pump station or whatever that would happen. So that's one issue. There's also a geotech issue with historically, but we're currently reviewing it, Crystal and her staff, in terms of using it for stormwater. If you pull it down at the rate you would need to, you may get erosion of the dam and have structural concerns. So that was just what was flagged historically. So there's certainly more work, but we are very cognizant that we need to work quickly. We're bringing on a consultant quickly to provide support, and we don't want it to delay this effort.
Yeah, what I remember, Ben, is that the final decision from the county, the first round, was it just wasn't big enough to be of interest to them. So I'm guessing they're gonna have, come up with the same conclusion,
Yeah, Marin's a tough place for stormwater storage and
especially that location.
projects. So yeah, I don't know how it's going to play out.
I mean, you've been following the bridge issue, I'm sure, and they can't seem to make a decision about that, let alone about this. And they're all hooked together, these things, that this project and that project are integrated.
Okay, thank you. So going on to the Sulahule electrification project. This project again is an early action project that came out of the roadmap, and it would set us up for improved efficiency for a longer term operating model by providing consistent and reliable power to the pump station at Sulahule, where currently we'd have to pull in generators to run the pump. This would improve the operability and flexibility and allow for more regular pumping of Sulahule to Nicasio reservoir. So we've been meeting with PG&E regularly a few times now since we last reported to the board in April, and there's been a number of technical alternative analysis that have been performed. Beginning in early July, they are planning on starting the load study that will be performed by their service planning group, and they'll look at the feasibility of electrical service upgrade. This will take into account the district's proposed operating model, existing facilities, and any options to improve the electrical system on our side of the meter to try to offset the initial load on startup. There's been quite a number of discussions on how often we will use the pump station, and some really good news from PG&E. They seem to be hinting that as long as we use it 15 minutes, 3 months out of the year, that they will pay for the capital investment on their side. And so it's amazing what we're hearing, but of course we don't have anything official yet. So
In which century are they talking?
yeah, right. Moving on, the Sustainable Solutions Turnkey Group was looking at different alternatives that would happen on our side of the meter, such as a permanent generator, fuel cells, batteries, solar. The preliminary results indicate that the solar may not be feasible alternative and that the pumps would only be able to run when solar is being generated. You'd have to couple it with some sort of fuel cell in order to have a solar option. So,
Or a Tesla wall.
right. And also all of the alternatives are still being looked at though. We also started looking at extending the pump discharge pipe all the way to Nicasio Reservoir, which would alleviate some of our environmental considerations for when we do want to run the pump station. And district staff will be bringing on an electrical engineer for technical support. And the project timing right now is largely based on PG&E's studies and their analyses and what they come out with in terms of whether or not it's feasible to upsize their system. Funding opportunities again on this project are the WRDA funding, and we're looking at other grant opportunities.
You don't mention PSPS issues. How does that integrate into the whole picture? I mean, I know they've changed their philosophy a little bit. They don't seem to be doing it now.
Mhm.
But, when we need the water is when, at least part of the time is when the PSPS would be engaged, and then we'd lose it altogether. How far is it from Sulahule to wherever, Bontempi or that? I mean, it's a long ways. huh?
I believe it's about eight miles.
I don't recall.
Yeah, it's pretty far. Yeah.
I've only gone to Sulahule once, and I know it feels like you're driving off the end of the earth.
Yeah.
You just keep driving and driving and driving and driving and driving and driving and driving.
Yeah.
And finally you get to this reservoir, which I still think we need bathrooms out there
Yeah.
because the fishermen are kind of out on their own. And I think a bathroom station would be a very good idea there.
There is, I believe.
Oh, they put one in?
the
Oh, good.
parking lot, yeah.
Good. My whining did something.
Crystal, quick question on the solar. Would that be the, including the floating solar that was brought up
Mhm.
before?
Yeah, and this, the recommendations that are coming from PG&E's Sustainable Solutions Group. So they're taking a hard look at the options and the capital costs and, whether or not it would work for our operations plan.
Great, thank you.
Of course, pumping 50% of the time is better than pumping no percent of the time.
And when we used it last, we ran it for 3 months continuously. So when we needed it, we're running it for quite some time, which PG&E looks at that and says, oh, great, revenue generation for us. So
Are they going to whack us for standby?
No, there's a demand charge typically for when you do run it. I think Tokoloma is about $10,000 when we start Tokoloma. So it wouldn't be somewhere in line with that, that demand charge.
And you could VFD them down, huh?
Right. So on our side of the meter, we are looking at VFDs and soft starts and maybe even going to medium voltage rather than the higher voltage that we have now on our motors. Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so just following on, more early actions and conservation. I'm not going to go through the 80 slides, or I could if you'd like, but I think we'll cut it down just to a few tonight. So we've been moving.
I
and
think you should follow Jed's suggestion to change those words to efficiency as opposed to conservation.
2 votes for efficiency.
General.
Good. We're inching closer to a decision. Yeah. Good. Thank you for that comment about the efficient. Oh yeah, indecision. Interesting. So our conservation program, of course, has been gearing up for summer, and we heard at the last week, a week ago today, at the committee meeting, a good deal of information about the water efficiency program. That's beyond just what's included in the strategic water supply assessment, which is what we're looking at here. So this is sort of the project element that was included in the strategic water supply piece, and these incentives programs here drive the water savings that we identified in that water conservation element. But I do want to talk a little bit about the outcome of the meeting. Director Kush gave a nice summary where essentially we came out of there with a few items to bring back to the board. One on gray water ordinance to look at some changes there, including the different ways to comply with that ordinance that we don't currently have, and maybe improve overall water savings, which is our goal. And of course, there's currently an easement on the turf conversion rebate that we think is kind of an impediment to following through with that. So with the existing ordinance that we have on non-functional turf, we think that would kind of the easement's redundant. No new non-functional turf, and so once you take it out, you wouldn't be able to put it back. And so there's some changes that we'll look to have a nice discussion with the board. Probably in late July, I think we're going to table these to come back to the board.
On the last one, I think it would be it's very timely for us to come back and talk about the non-functional turf, because as we are now in a wet year, for a lot of years, the limitations on irrigation of non-functional turf probably meant a lot of non-functional turf looked pretty bad, to the point where I worry that businesses are putting back in their non-functional turf because now that there's water and there aren't restrictions on irrigation. And it's an investment that I would like to see people not make especially if we're going to move in a direction of banning non-functional turf. So I think it's a good, timely discussion. It's kind of time.
Yep.
Have we looked at the cost per square foot of cutting the grass? How much does it cost to maintain that turf?
I don't know.
It's an interesting question.
There's definitely numbers out there,
Yeah,
and when you
sure,
factor in the cost of maintaining your lawn. Now, I don't know about non-functional turf because it's usually in larger square footage, and you have maintenance contracts and yada yada. But it adds up. It's a lot, and
Yeah, it's a lot.
ultimately, it is a financial saver to the person who removes their turf over time.
Yeah,
by
I
not
wonder if
having to
it's
maintain
not
it.
equal to the water. The cost, it wouldn't surprise me. Fertilizer and cutting and the maintenance.
I think it includes the cost of conversion too. It pays out over time. How many years it takes before you see a return on that investment, I don't know. It probably really depends on a lot of factors, but
There was a similar comment made at the committee meeting, asking us to look at ways to kind of help our customers understand this process and the benefits to them. So thanks for that. And then, of course, hand in hand with the actual programs that we have, it's really about how we reach people and encourage them to participate. And so the summary that Adrian presented here, far more ably than I can tonight, but just to give you an idea of some of the events that have taken place since February 1st. some of these metrics. So, 17 mentions in e-news with a couple earned media, a nice article example of that in the IJ here about a gentleman who kind of created an urban farmyard almost in his backyard using a number of our incentive programs. So really some good stuff going on in terms of outreach, and more of that to come. So as we, oops. What did I skip over here? Oh yeah, this is our water loss. I couldn't even read the thing. This is our water loss reduction. So we've engaged a consultant and put a team together since we last spoke. The consultant is eSource. They've done a lot of work in this area, and we'll be asking them to take a broad look at our program. As you may recall from reporting on the water loss for the district, we're actually in compliance with all the state regulations on water loss, meaning our ratios. If you remember that Madaus discussion, we're at about 1 on the ratio, which is kind of where you want to be. But recognizing that there's always room for improvement. So what can we do better to drive that ratio less than 1? And that's going to be the focus a little bit of this water loss reduction program. And we're going to, we want to take a broad look at the technology that's out there and see if there's something that we're missing. And an example of that is, satellite imaging systems. And we're going to, not just stop there. There'll be a number of these technological approaches. We take a look at them. Where have they been successful? Under what circumstances were they successful? And do they apply to our situation?
Sorry, Paul, I didn't understand the ratio of 1. We normally talk about percentages of, non-revenue water, but what was the ratio?
Yeah, so there's in the water loss program, there's sort of real losses and sort of unaccounted for water. That ratio is the percentage. So when the ratio is equal to about 1, you've hit this sort of normalized standard. If you're much above 1, the state would ask you to, you need to do some work on that.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just divided by the number. So they've set it, I don't know what, 10% or something of that type.
Yeah, I don't recall the exact number where, if you're how much over 1 you would need to be in order to not meet the state regulations on water loss reductions. But I can email you that information if you're interested.
Yeah, it's a term or a way of thinking about it that I hadn't seen before. In the analysis of our water loss options, will we be including AMI as one of the strategies for reducing leakage?
Typically, it's not in this case. It's AMI is more of a bigger rollout project, but it could be a discussion point.
AMI is generally designed for the residents or the business. And what we're looking for, generally, it's a system.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is out in the distribution system. So other technologies are acoustic sensors on hydrants, for example, things like that. So our schedule then briefly for this is we'll be kicking off internally meeting this June and then looking to have a gap analysis done, sort of where are we? How does our program compare? What technologies are out there later this summer? And then finalizing that sort of technical memo in fall.
I think it's important to bring you guys up to speed, though. We have a sophisticated group that monitors for leaks. So they have these headphones or acoustic listeners, microphones that can actually hear the leaks. So they're doing that now. What Paul's talking about is a little more sophisticated, automated system, but it's the same idea. They go around and they listen for these kind of leaks, and then they zero in on it, and then they dig here.
Right.
But we have a good team for that right now. And they've been very successful in reducing water losses.
So it's like 10% kind of an industry standard.
Yep.
And we're kind of, where are we?
Right around that
Yeah,
number.
so I
Yeah.
thought. And so we're just looking to get better.
10% is a phenomenal number. Low. I mean, places like Rio or Sao Paulo are 50%.
I should mention our leak detection program it's like the Golden Gate Bridge and painting the bridge. We get through our 900 miles of pipe every 1 to 2 years and we start over again. And so then we find new leaks and then start over again. So
And you can imagine how tricky this is with traffic and things like that, huh? There's a lot of background noise that they need it quiet when they're doing this because these are not very loud, these little leaks.
Are we finding leaks in particular parts of our system that are aged and are on our slate to replace?
that's a good question. And, we classify our leaks in 3 ways, class 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the ones that are sort of seeping. You don't really see water flowing on the surface. And so we do have an ongoing list, the leaks holding list. It usually takes us 2 or 3 weeks or maybe even up to a month to get to that particular leak. And we try to keep the leaks holding lists to maybe 10 at the most at any one time.
Yeah, there seems to be a challenge in developing a spatial pattern. It's not quite that straightforward, and it tends to be associated with material type, soil around the pipe, the pressure in the pipe, the traffic over. There's just a lot of factors. It's very challenging to predict.
Actually at the last San Diego, there was a Cal Nevada section conference for AWWA recently, and we reported, we had a presentation at that conference looking at the temporal identification of leaks. So it's one thing to look at our pipe model and look at age and material type and, whether or not it's time to fix that and the leak history. But to the extent that the leaks become more frequent in present time, then we actually push those pipe replacements up on the list. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if I can find my clicker, moving to the sort of longer term projects, looking at Petaluma River brackish desalination, we brought to the operations committee in April, I think it was, or was it May, excuse me, an MOU draft that we have with the city of Petaluma. And Petaluma are very interested in this project, as you can imagine, and they've sort of accelerated some of the technical analysis portion of it by, they had a little extra budget in their resiliency study that was ongoing with Kennedy Jenks. And so they've asked Kennedy to look at the water yield, sort of a preliminary look at the water yield for this project, meaning they're going to take a look at existing information from existing wells in the area to look at water quality, what the hydroconductivity is, and build a model. So we should get some good preliminary information probably by the end of June. That can feed into the next step for us would be releasing the RFP for this project, which is just about ready to go when Petaluma put their hand up and said, hey, we've got some funding available. So some good news there.
Paul, the preliminary information we get might help us determine how aggressively to pursue this, or is it too early? Will it be too early?
It's a really good question, and one that I asked the geoscience firm whether this information would be definitive or indicative. And I think it's really going to be indicative for us. I don't know that we're going to get a very clear cut answer in terms of, 5.5 MGD yield. It'll be, oh, this looks interesting, or this looks challenging. I think that's maybe more where we'll end. I could be wrong, but that's my impression.
But just to push it, if they say it looks really, really challenging, that might start to take us towards.
I think that would put us in line with our other longer term projects at that point. But yes, your point's well taken. Yeah.
I think this one's going to be really, really challenging. You're pumping out of clay and it's just hard to get the kind of water flows you need unless you're prepared to drill 100 wells, which is $50 million or more.
And that's the kind of thing they'll let us know. Yeah. So schedule for this is a little bit up in the air, but I think we'll be able to release the RFP late July based on getting that geotech information, and we'll still be able to bring that feasibility study to the board should you wish to pursue it, late fall. Probably it says August here, but August, September timeframe. And then the funding, the board is aware that we've applied for a grant for the USBR for $200,000 to support this project with a $250,000 match. And then looking at our conveyance of supplemental water to storage, the RFPs for this project have been released. So I'll just jump back for a second for folks who may be new to this. This is the conveyance of winter water from the Sonoma County Water Agency system into a Marin reservoir. And so looking at a pipeline potentially from the Cotati tanks to directly to one of our reservoirs, or another project, parallel project, alternate project, excuse me, of following the existing infrastructure and maybe adding some new infrastructure to that to bring the water to storage.
Where are the Cotati tanks? Obviously in Cotati, but where are they
I couldn't give you an address to,
roughly?
I mean,
Winter Park? I mean, that kind of that boundary there, or
they're
and out in the woods or something, or up on a hill, or
imagine to the left of 101.
going north?
Yeah.
Yeah, the west, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So in terms of distance, if you, as the crow flies, about 10 miles from Sulahuli, that type of distance is
Pretty good hike still.
the height. Yeah, it's a 700 height.
Hike,
Oh, hike,
distance.
hike and height. And to Director Cush's earlier question about whether there were other opportunities for recovery, it's about a 700-foot lift. So you'd have
That's a chunk.
a benefit of picking some of that back up on the way down the hill.
Yeah, after you get it to the beach.
Yeah.
Paul, would Sulahuli be the preferred destination for that if the electricity component starts materializing?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It would be the shortest conveyance.
Plus, Sulahuli's water starved. There isn't enough watershed that feeds that reservoir. It's probably bigger than it needs to be right now. Maybe on a bumper year, it might see something. So this is a really good idea. And I think it's also really good for North Marin. It has great potential to backfeed to Safford Lake, which gives them a much more reliable water supply. So right now, what I like to say is they get the dog shit and the stuff, they get the first flush into their Stafford Lake, which requires them to do a great deal of treatment. They have full-blown treatment plus ozone to burn out the odor, taste and odor out of that water so they can make it even palatable. It also has a huge algae problem in Stafford because of all the first flush stuff that goes in there. So they catch everything that you would normally let go. They catch that. So it's not really, in my opinion, a desired water quality. I would have great deal of problem with it if we was our reservoir, just because it's, I mean, Phoenix has a bit of that. Not quite, but a touch. More
Stafford
if
is,
it's used as a stormwater detention basin.
yeah, Stafford can definitely be challenging. So this project,
Super supportive as well. I think there's an enormous amount of potential here. The environmental impact is a lot lower than some of the other ideas that we're looking at. It seems to be within reach, feasible, and it would encourage a regional approach that I think we're going to have a lot of high level support from. So happy to help think this through with you.
Yeah, likewise. This is, I just think regional partnerships are the future of water supply reliability and security, not only here, but frankly throughout the West and elsewhere where people are really dealing with climate change issues and impacts on water supply. I wonder, and speaking of which, I wonder whether when we look at a scope of a project for 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet per year, but we just heard about the FIRO related yield that Sonoma is facing. I don't want to be presumptive that there's more there that could be possible in the future, but I guess a question I have is the number that we have up there is encouraging. We were moving forward and based on that, but I wonder to what extent we can be looking at the potential conveyance, being flexible enough that should we develop partnerships, deeper partnerships with Sonoma, whether that number could go up and whether we position ourselves in order to be able to be a partner and receive more. So I'm sure you're thinking about these things, but it's just I feel like we're learning things every year in terms of our partnership with Sonoma that might change the future in ways that we haven't expected and hopefully will.
Also in terms of regional partnering, we had our kind of first call with Marin water agencies the staff, executive staff, Paul and I had a call today to engage them on just initial concepts, understanding what we're doing, and we'll have a follow-up discussion on their interest. Not just North Marin, but Inverness was on Muir Beach, and who was the fourth? North Marin, Muir Beach.
Bolinas.
Oh, and Bolinas. You know, they all use just a tiny amount of water, but right, if this does turn out to be a broad regional project, would they have a small piece of it, right? It's more apt to get grant funding and just have the feel of a regional benefit. So we'll be briefing the board as those discussions continue.
I love that. I love the idea of having air cover for some of our neighbors that are right here in Marin.
Right.
To have more of a full holistic approach, working with Stafford Lake and North Marin and Novato, working potentially through Sonoma. I think we're in a very interesting position, and I think the kinds of opportunities for true deep partnerships are now in front of us that may not have been there for the last 20 years. And I think we can start to rewrite the tenor of these discussions in a way that's positive for everyone. And I can't wait to grab onto that.
If I could just follow up on a couple of questions. I think at the last operations committee meeting, Paul and Ben, you provided a really helpful explanation of the semi-independence of winter water in the Russian River from their reservoirs. And, you know, you showed Paul the sort of the excess availability, winter water that's available. When I speak with constituents, particularly those that are familiar with Sonoma, they'll always come back and say, well, but there's all these, you know, Sonoma suffers more water shortages than Marin. There's a lot of, conservation measures that you know, and even restrictions put into place. And is that just exaggeration, or are they, I mean, what are the issues around their water supply that, are there any issues around their water supply in Sonoma that might impinge on our projects?
I would start with a lot of their issues that, for example, we saw with the drought are because lack of storage. I'm not talking about Lake Sonoma. I'm talking about the northern Russian River communities. When you don't have storage, winter water only does you so good. You have to have a way to tap it. And right, in times of severe drought, there's not water there in the river. And if you don't have storage, right? So,
Or you don't have Potter Valley. I mean, this is the game that Potter Valley is involved with.
right. But the fact that there is winter water available and we have somewhere to park it, I just think that's the big distinction and way to think about it, why we're looking at that water differently and looking at the Russian River and Sonoma system differently than some of the communities that get stretched for water during times of drought. It's just different when you have storage and you're linking the opportunity to fill up the storage so you're prepared during drought. I don't know if that.
Another way maybe to think about it too is, right, Sonoma has about 75,000 acre feet of water rights. And they currently are, I think they sold last, on the order of 45,000 acre feet per year. And we're not talking about going anywhere near outside of our own, supply agreements with Sonoma. So I don't see Sonoma as having shortages of water in the supply sense. I think that, as Ben was saying, on the upper Russian River in drought conditions, there can be some challenging circumstances. And they are looking, I think, in some of those areas at, trying to store winter water in the aquifer, right? Alexander Valley Floodmar is kind of an example project where they're trying to take winter water and store it in the ground. So I haven't heard of any definitive shortages related to Sonoma water.
And this number, the 4,000 to 6,000, just reminding the board, that's a very conservative number, meaning it comes from modeling of basically the 4-year severe drought and how much water you can get in like year 2 and 3 of that severe drought. Typically, there'll be far more water available and we'll be able to fill up our system as we need to and benefit probably more on an as needed basis than those numbers.
And our contract currently allows for up to 14,300 acre feet per year
Yeah, with no way to get it here.
with no, right.
We can get close.
And that was the excitement when we spent the $6.5 million because we knew they had no way of getting it here. Okay, not even close. So it was a big investment on the come.
So sorry, Larry, that was for the expansion of the Castagna pump station that you're.
No, this was when Cynthia and I joined the board. There was a deadline that was 6 months into our term and about June of 2005. And we were faced, because of our contract, with take it or leave it from 5,400 to 14,003 for $6.5 million. So we ponied up, the district ponied up $6.5 million to firm the contract from 5,400 to 14,300, with the understanding that we had no way of getting that water, not even close. This is, you're talking here probably 10,000.
Well, I did want to say the Castagna upgrade that the board started a couple of years ago has been really dramatic
Sure.
in terms of our capacity. For example, today we're at about 12 MGD, a lot of hard work by operations managing that water, but we wouldn't have gotten near to that without the Castagna upgrade. So it really got us much closer than we historically have been, but there is a gap. Probably we want to be able to get to 15 MGD on a regular basis if we wanted to tap the full 14.
But right now we got to have another route because the pipeline is just too small.
And
Pump that kind of
redundancy and other things. There's
Yeah.
a lot of value for us as well as North Marin that you've mentioned.
Okay, so just quickly, we've released the RFP. It's out on the street. There's a good deal of interest in the project. We're looking at receiving, we're gonna, June 14th, we're gonna have a site visit by prospective consultants who will be responding to the
Who
RFP.
are they? Roughly.
You know,
Montgomery
the
and
usual,
Stantec.
usual suspects, Carollo, I think Kennedy Jenks, Jacobs, Stantec, and I'm drawing a blank on.
Woodard
on a
Curran, I
couple.
assume, is not allowed.
Correct. Yeah,
And Paul, this is all for the pre-design work, the RFP.
yeah,
Okay.
this is all going to be pre-designed work, yeah. And the first task they'll have is sort of looking at exactly what we've just been talking about in terms of capacities, routings, and reliability.
Are they looking at ASR too? Or leaving that to Sonoma?
That's Sonoma's working on that right now, yeah.
Could that short circuit us?
Um,
Guess we still have no way to get it down, huh?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think this conveyance to storage, it's very similar, right? It's just we know we have the capacity to store it, and ASR in Sonoma is it's gonna require just a different way of using the groundwater up there that isn't currently what they're used to, and would be and will be long-term as a project and challenging to set those, groundwater banking rules and getting all of those different players and communities to agree on a set of rules.
Plus water quality.
Yeah.
Getting the turbidity out, it's no simple task if you take it raw water out of the river.
Yeah. Okay, and then local storage, again, for folks who may be tuning in for the first time, we're looking at potentially increasing one of our local reservoirs, a nominal 20,000 acre foot. And the idea here is just to take advantage of the wet weather, for example, that we've seen this past winter. We would be able to collect that water and then use it if the next 3 to 4 years were dry. We would benefit on an order of 4,000 or 5,000 acre feet per year of extra storage. And of course, we will calculate in evaporation and all the nitty gritty details in terms of losses that we would need to do. But just for the purposes of planning, it's about a 20,000 acre foot look at increasing storage. And again, we've released the RFP for this project. And we expect, again, there'll be a site visit June 15th, the day after the site visit for the conveyance. And then we've also had the opportunity of some preliminary discussions with the state board on this subject at President Cush's suggestion, President Schmidt's suggestion. And Kate Gaffney was very helpful at the state board in helping us identify the sorts of process and information that we'll need to go through.
You're talking about 9517, I presume?
Just sort of generally the state process in terms of permit amendments.
That's great. I mean, you know, as you correctly flagged me for having brought that up a number of times, I think that that's obviously a really important conversation. I know it sounds like you've had preliminary conversations, so there's not a conclusion from that, but it would just be really, I think we've talked about not only engaging them, but also whether we bring in our own, water rights expert who could give us some sense of where the line is, wherein if we change our storage volumes, when would it trigger potentially a new water right, and the terms and conditions that might change therein. I think that's really still one of those Achilles heels that could really take what's otherwise a very feasible project and take the yield completely out of it. So I guess I'm flagging that I would really love for us to get to that conversation before we start contracting out feasibility analyses that we're spending a lot of money on. If there's a fatal flaw in something that doesn't cost us very much to find, I'd like to get at that before we invest more money.
I think I appreciate that comment, because that's in line with what we're thinking, that we won't be able to likely get a definitive answer. We see it likely as being an iterative process, but certainly we are interested. Are there fatal flaws in this concept, and trying to kind of smoke those out sooner than later? But to really get definitively and understand releases, we'll know better over the next couple months, and we have some time before we'd be coming back to the board to authorize starting this contract. But it seems that it'll be kind of hand in hand of talking to the resource agencies, filling in technical gaps, bringing them back to the agencies, that kind of iterative process.
Do you think the current activity is going to affect us? The state's a lot of action going on right now.
The legislation, the bills and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but
I'd say the general tenor in Sacramento feels very much in our favor in terms of just a push to help the state move some of these projects forward in different ways.
Yeah. Okay. So preliminary, certainly not conclusive discussions with the state board, and more to come. And we do have plans to engage with you on that. Again, funding for the project, we have actually a couple funding slides towards the end. Did I skip one there? I did. So this is maybe a 16-month outlook. Keep switching around. Happy trigger finger. For the three sort of longer term projects, being this, storage, conveyance, and Petaluma River Brackish. And if we start with the Petaluma River Brackish at the bottom, you can see the sort of technical, you may have to take my word for it, but that bottom bar is the desalination technical analysis, the long bar. And you can see that's extending back into the consultant procurement period. And then in terms of the storage technical analysis, we're hoping to have the consulting team on towards to the board sort of I think it's the second board meeting in September. So as Ben said, we do have some time to get through looking at water rights and potential fatal flaws there. And similarly with the conveyance project, we're looking to bring the team on, and that one will have a slightly shorter technical period. As you might imagine, we've got a lot of information from Jacobs on the conveyance from Sonoma. And we've got a full sort of model of the Sonoma system and all the rules built into that. So we'll just sort of be double checking some of that work. And again, you'll hear a little bit more of that in the Woodard item that follows this one.
So just kind of reinforcing.
So we can hold Paul to this. No, I'm kidding, but this is an aggressive time frame. Just sharing with the board and the public to really move forward this big, large conveyance project and have a decision ideally by the end of the year on the project. So that's our goal. By the end of the year, having a defined project that obviously will facilitate grant funding, moving in and design, environmental, the whole thing, work with the stakeholders. So a lot of work between now and the end of the year to get that project really shaped and defined.
Paul, this is very helpful to see it in this perspective. So we have an understanding of the timeline and where things are moving. And it's also really good to hear that we're able to leverage the big investment we made with Jacobs to be able to move some of these along faster. But just to follow up on what Ben's saying, this is aggressive timeline. I appreciate the speed for which we're moving based on the conditions we face. So thank you.
Thanks, Director.
Yeah, I would think you might want to hold off on the end of the year until the DPR regs are out. Just so you know what that end of the stick looks like before we actually make a decision, or at least get a conclusion.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
Maybe it's lay of the land kind of issues you're talking about, like what route the pipeline takes or something.
Right.
If it's just that kind of stuff, it doesn't much matter. But if it's getting back to the water rights issues, that could get pretty sticky.
Yeah, so this is, right, I'm distinguishing Dan's project from storage.
Mhm.
So the storage has a longer, because it's a more complex analysis. That's where the water rights would really. The nice thing of conveyance, right, it doesn't have that piece, it doesn't have an mention. Really a capital project for stakeholders we have to work with. But it does feel like, I think as Director Smith noted earlier, that project doesn't have the external constraints that some of these others have, but what we should be able, it's aggressive.
Well, and I think the public's asking us to be aggressive, right? We just passed a rate increase, or we almost ran out of water in 2021. We have an enormous amount of work to do to ensure that we have resiliency for the long term. And so the public should realize that we're going for it. We're going to do everything we can to understand the feasibility and to try to make this timeline, which if we do hit it, then when you combine the low hanging fruit that we have of several thousand acre feet with Suluhuli electrification, et cetera, and you combine the 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet, which you believe is conservative, it could be higher, then we're getting close to that 10,000 acre feet of supply that people have been articulating. Now, is that the right number? I'm not sure, but we're starting to look like a roadmap that can possibly be implemented. And I think we're going to go for it. And I hope people realize that we're going to do our best to try to make it happen.
Seems to me that, and maybe you've already done this, that one of the things that would make sense is to connect that pipeline into the suction of the Suluhuli pump station. One of the things that bothers me about all this is you're taking water that could be drunk, dumping in an open reservoir, having to retreat it. But if you could bypass that and shoot it straight into the pump station, which, it's just a little more feet of pipes and a few more fittings and valves, then you'd have the option of being able to shoot the water straight into the treatment plant or the system, or it could be changed any way you wanted because it's already drinking water quality.
Larry, I don't, can you explain why is that already drinking water quality? The new,
Because it's the same water that I drink every day in Tiburon. It's the Russian River water from the
it's being treated
rainy
at
collector.
Ignacio.
No. It comes from the rainy collectors, which have a special dispensation from the state to say that that's groundwater, not surface water influenced groundwater.
It must require chlorination though.
Oh, yes, of course,
At Ignacio.
but that's nothing. I mean,
No, they chlorinated at the collectors.
At the
the
collector.
heavy lift is you're taking drinking water, putting it in an open reservoir, then you have to treat the effluent from the reservoir. The discharge from the reservoir, before you can use it, has to be treated. That's why we send it to the treatment plant. What I'm saying is you could skip that step by bringing the water straight into the back of the pump station. I don't know about the mixing the lines. You know, it's kind of the Phoenix Lake problem, right? Sometimes it's raw water, sometimes it's treated water.
But
It's interesting, yeah.
So we'll call this Ben's schedule from. If we look in a slightly more compressed time frame in the next few months here, what staff will be up to, there's just, it's a busy slide. It's just indicative. There's a lot of work going on in the background to support these projects and keep them moving forward. And then reminding us that we do have a grant of $2 million that was awarded in 2022 from DWR under their Urban and Multi-Benefit Drought Program. It's covered all of the cost of the Jacobs effort so far, so it hasn't cost us a penny, and it's eligible for helping us move forward any of these other road mount projects as they come up. So
That's very good news.
we're in a race to see who can get there first between Crystal and myself and grab that money. No, and of course, there's
Jacobs is winning the race, I can tell.
they're already at the bank. The Water Resources Development Act, the WRDA funding, the 28 million that's out there for development of water and recycled water in Marin. We're hoping to target that for I think it's either Phoenix or the electrification of Sulahuili as well. So once we target that money and get our fingerprints on it, then we can explain to the Army Corps how we intend to use the rest of that money. And that's how we kind of secure that WRDA funding.
And we can thank Jared Huffman for that. He
Right.
earmarked that for us.
Right. And then we have a number of applications in. I won't go through all of them here, but there's one large, substantial one for $53 million. And then there's 3 different projects associated with that, including recycled water. The last one on the bottom is the small storage program that Crystal talked about. This is not an application yet, but this is going to be coming this fall. Once the consultant's hired, they'll complete the feasibility study that's required as part of the submittal for that grant package, and we'll get that in. And it has a 75% match, but even so, it'll be a nice piece of grant funding for us. We're not sure what the application amount will be at this time.
I'm meeting with George Bonnegus on Thursday for lunch. I'll find out what's going on with DPR.
Great.
And where it's going,
Great.
if it's going to get there or not.
Yeah, let me know. And then this is the sort of preliminary funding schedule as we look at spreading our funds around to support each of these projects. This hasn't changed since we saw it in April, and it'll remain in this format until we have some feedback from our consulting teams to help us fine tune this. Our next steps then are we're going to continue pedaling as fast as we can on our early action projects. You saw the slide. In the next several months, we'll be working hard to make sure that RFP process on the 2 big projects for conveyance and storage, and of course Petaluma River Brackish, that those keep moving forward in the right way. And then of course, in terms of the Petaluma Brackish, any information we have will bring as an update for you in terms of water yield for that project, so you can kind of read the tea leaves, as it were, on that one. And we're going to continue to track grants and pursue those as best we can for all of the roadmap projects, and we'll be back to the board. Probably be sick of seeing us in the next few months. So that's
I
the
wonder if
presentation.
we should put like 3 speedometers on the webpage or odometers and show kind of where we are,
I think it's a really great question, which is how do we continue to keep people up to date on what we're doing? So I think on this one, Paul, we can't get sick of you and Crystal. That we expect to see the show on a regular basis, and I would advocate that we because I think this is so important to what we are doing. It's such an important part of our investments that just having our first board meeting of the month be like, I think 20 minutes on the agenda was completely fantasy. And bet we maybe could get down to that if we have a way of having a system of just tracking very quickly. We don't need to go through everything all the time, but having a schedule, not unlike the second schedule you showed, actually broke out the longer term projects in a higher level resolution, separating them from the near term projects. Something where we can look at and say, we're on track. We've talked about it. Are there any questions? And we can move on. And that way we can really make sure that on a regular basis, we are staying on top of it because it is so important. And for the public that wants to stay on tune with it, then they can know that the first board meeting of the month will be a standing agenda item. So I think I would really encourage that. I think this is important enough for us to not let months go by. We can just do quick updates. And I know that based on this conversation, we clearly have a board interest in talking about it. So
That's a great idea. I think maybe though, we could split that between the doc and this in the board meetings. You could do the high level stuff here. If you want to get into the nitty gritty, do it in the doc. Where if you need to take 45 minutes, you take 45 minutes. As opposed to doing it here, which makes it a little more complicated because, I'm noticing a difference in dynamics, which I don't know how many Zoom people are on this meeting. Roughly.
19.
Yeah. So, that's a dynamic look like it's permanent to me is that, Phil Sauter's here and a few other people, but they're no longer going to be in the room. That they're someplace else, which is interesting about how that changes the questions in particular. So, you might want to think about that in terms of strategy of where we do what, how we make the presentations because of who the audience is.
Well, I'll third the support to have this as a part of the monthly meetings on some level in the beginning. So
Yeah.
that's a great idea. And happy to go in as much detail as you want, Larry.
Paul, Monty just noted that we can't cover everything in every meeting, but you didn't refer to recycled water expansion.
I just mentioned that we continue looking for grants. We do have the grant application in for 53 million, which addresses, I think the specific project in there is the Peacock Gap pipeline. We are working with another private water user to explore grants. And they've engaged a consultant
I think you can tell them who they are.
in coordination. I'll leave that to you.
Oh, okay.
They're-
Well, it's
they're-
a Meadow Club, looking at the two big golf courses
Yeah.
in Marin.
So,
And there's others though, of course, like Mill Valley and places like that.
so we are looking, it's early to, nothing really significant to report in those areas at this time.
Just to follow up, Paul, on Director Cush's comments about the recycled water, because I think it is important. And going back to the actual roadmap, when we look at hitting our new acre feet per year, the earlier slide showed that number achievable if desal came online with a certain amount of acre feet production per year. And so that would be reducing it if that becomes too tough. And so I think we have to look for, we have to have plan B. And I think maybe that's not the best term for it, but at least start showing a placeholder that when the regulations come out, we'll start more aggressively looking at recycled water in parallel to desalination so that
Maybe. I get very little pushback in my district, except on that issue. That's when I get in parties and things like that. People come to me and say, "You're not really going to do that, right?"
for which one, the recycled?
The DPR.
Okay.
Yeah. So be aware that while it's conceptually a good idea, it may not really be implementable just because of toilet to tap. Orange County got through it, but that doesn't mean we can get through it. And, that's the complicating factor. It's a great idea. And, in answering your question, Phil, about the purple pipe, that's what DPR is all about because they threw in the towel. The purple pipe is just too expensive to replumb and put the second system in. I pitched prior to Ben a lot to say, why don't we lay the purple pipe down every time we put a new pipeline in so that we finally get it in the ground and then use it for fire hydrants in between. But I haven't succeeded in that. And until we get something like that, where there's some push to catch it up, we're never going to catch up with the distribution of reclaimed water. There may be a few of these like Meadow Club and Peacock Gap, but other than that, it's just, and the biggest problem we have, in my opinion, is San Rafael, who just doesn't want us digging up the streets because we have to come right through San Rafael to do it. We're about to the other end of San Rafael now, down where the Civic Center is, but we have to come all that way from there, which is a long way through the middle of San Rafael. So there's a lot of issues. It's a great idea. It's perfect solution. Using marginal water for marginal use, perfect idea. But the implementation is very tricky. One thing I want to say too, though, be very careful in speaking to Ed Jamison, who I assume is still online. He's right. These projects are very costly dollars per acre foot, but they're dollars per acre foot once. So Peacock Gap is pricey to get the water out there. It's only 250 acre feet, but it's pricey. But once you've done it, it's done. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. So it just returns and returns and returns and returns and returns. So when you calculate the dollars per acre foot, I don't know, what years do you use? You know, if you did it on 1 year, it's terrible. If you did it on 100 years, it's not so bad. That's a really complicating factor, is what is the reasonable return from the investment? Because that's kind of a Corps of Engineers type of thing, this dollars per acre foot. It's interesting, but don't bank too hard on it. And the limitation with desal is going to be cost, not technical.
Well, we can bank on the longer we wait, the more expensive it will get.
Yeah,
to
but
put-
you know, it's not really true, because inflation and interest are tied together.
Right.
So it's really the same. So when you have inflation, it's just the cost of interest. So you spend it here or you spend it here, it's really the same amount of money because you've had the money in your pocket. You didn't have to borrow it back here to pay for this. So it's a little complicated. You're correct. The dollars are more, but it's like your mortgage. You know, your mortgage, the actual cost is going down because the dollar's worth less.
Well, I think there's lots of reasons not to do everything, right? So we can come up with lots of reasons. And so I think where we have decided to go, I'm very supportive. We're pursuing grant money to see if recycled water opportunities will work for us. That can fund it. We're pursuing feasibility studies for desalination. We're going to learn more. We're pursuing regional approaches to gaining more water supply. I think you're doing it all right. So I'm not willing to write off recycling at this point, or DPR or desal for one reason or another. I think we're going on the right path. Let's keep it up. And I'm very supportive of your
Yes.
presentation and where we are. Thank you.
It's too early to put anything away. So thank you.
Now it's the Paul show.
Actually, we have a few comments, public comments. All right, the first speaker I have is Mr. Phil Sauter, then I have Ed Jamison and Roger Roberts.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. I spent a few hours today with the grandfather of that presentation, the May 30th one, looking at those that flume study. It looked to me, looking at the graphs, that those flume users use about 80 gallons per household per day indoors and 80 gallons per day outdoors. So it looks like more of a 50-50 split. They're using half their water outdoors, and I kind of thought that we were 40%. So we may be using more outdoors than we think. I went through trying to find if there were some things we could hang our hat on in terms of turf conversion, and the best numbers I found were the non-residential, non-functional turf conversion. There's 250 sites. 35 acres of commercial, industrial, and institutional turf, or about 1.5 million square feet, which I think we're planning to convert 5% a year, or 75,000 square feet per year until 2045. And at $3 per square foot, that'll cost $225,000 a year. The potential water savings is 147,000 gallons per day. And that comes out to $1,350 per acre foot. Now, 147,000 gallons per day is nowhere near the 4 million gallons that I was looking for. So I tried to figure out how much residential turf is there. What's our goal for residential turf conversion? And let's say we wanted to save 2 million gallons a day from residential turf conversion. I figured out that just doing the multiplier, to save 2 million gallons a day from residential turf conversion would require doing 14 times more than the commercial turf conversion. That would be to get that savings, we'd need 1 million square feet of residential turf conversion a year. And at $3 per square foot, that would be $3 million for to save 2 million gallons a day. That's equal to 2,225 acre feet annually. So for 3 million gallons, or for $3 million, we get that 2,225 acre feet, and that equals $1,350 per acre foot. That's among the cheapest water supply options that we've looked at. Even if we went to $5 per square foot for turf conversion, that's $2,200 per acre foot. That's cheap. So my question is, in the upcoming study, what's the potential to save 4 million gallons a day from residential turf conversion? I think it's really a cheap way to get that water savings and that water supply. And unlike desal, you don't have to spend $10 million on new filters every few years. So I think it's worthwhile putting that water savings or conservation in the really, really early action category.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Miss-
Phil, for that. The math. That's impressive. We appreciate it.
The next two, Ed Jamison and Roger Roberts. Go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Yes, thanks. This was another excellent presentation by district staff tonight. I'd like to particularly thank Director Russell for his institutional knowledge on the subjects covered tonight. On Petaluma desal, I hope some attempt will be made to determine whether ongoing pumping from wells may result in the intrusion of salt water from the bay, or maybe Director Russell's quote, pumping water from clay, end quote, remark minimizes this risk. On the Phoenix Reservoir project, I don't recall seeing an estimated cost per acre foot, and I believe it has been a long time since the size of potential benefits have been shown. My recollection is that they are pretty trivial. On electrifying Sulahuli, I don't understand how electrification will add any material amount to our water supply. This could use some explanation. I believe the short-term projects are not significant, and that puts the focus on fast-tracking studies like Petaluma desal. That is the most important study to get resolved, either for better or if infeasible, so that we can move ahead with other more likely solutions to our water inadequacy. As for Sonoma Water, just a reminder that in the recent drought, Sonoma notified us that we would only get 4,000 acre feet for the next year and only 3,500 acre feet the next year. And lastly, I'd take a pass on any more work with Jacobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Roberts, please, then 1402.
Yes, my questions are really just a one simple question. In the Lagunitas work for the flows that are being provided, I didn't hear any mention of meeting temperature requirements, and I don't know how many sites you have in the Lagunitas watershed for measuring temperature, but temperature is everything for smolts. And you have to meet relatively low temperatures in order for them to survive and thrive. So at your next presentation on Lagunitas, I would ask if you could also give us some temperature analysis as a result of the measures taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. 1402, then Larry Minikes.
James Holmes, Larkspur. 3 questions and a comment. Question regarding the proposed automation of releases in Lagunitas. Do we have any idea whether currently or in the future this would result in more water released or less water released? We would sure shoot ourselves in the foot if we spent money to automate it and it turned out we had to release more water. Pardon me. Number 2, did I correctly understand with regard to the proposed water storage that it was characterized as, quote, nominal, unquote? Is that accurate? And is that a good idea? Number 3, why are we looking at increasing storage at only one reservoir rather than the possibility of other reservoirs, especially if some of these other ideas don't pan out? Finally, I fully agree with the proposal to continue and expand discussions with the Water Board, but if it becomes too iterative and the Water Board is too evasive as well they might be, we really should consider also opening up conversations with our legislators, particularly newly elected Assemblyman Connolly, with a view toward possible special legislation to free us in some manner from the straitjacket that the Water Board placed us in 1995. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larry Minikes?
Yes, good evening. I'd like to thank the Paul and Crystal show, or if it's the Crystal and Paul show, depending. And a really great presentation this evening in the big picture. It's unfolding, giving us a really good, solid look at where we're headed. And from a community perspective, this is really all we can ask for. And very much appreciate everything that's been presented tonight and all the questions that the board has brought up and the comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Mr. Clayton Smith?
Yeah, I scrolled up and down through the agenda that was put out on the web for the meeting and never found a link to the presentation that was done, making it rather difficult to follow the presentation. So I think in the future, if you could actually make that a little more apparent, or at least supply a link to the slideshow that they presented, it would be very helpful. I think I speak for a whole lot of people in the county who have been anticipating it somehow or another that this last drought would have woken up the board to actually do some real look at expanding all of our possible reservoir storage so that we got maybe a 20 or 30% increase in storage from our what you call winter water. We just had a bumper year of rain brought to us, in my opinion, probably by DARPA. But however it came to us, I think we're probably seeing almost a half a year or maybe even a year's worth of water that could have been captured go down the spillway and back out to sea, which I think is a pretty inexcusable thing for the water board to have allowed over the years, this neglect of increasing actual storage, knowing our long-term potential problems. And going back to this thing about toilet to tap and desal, I think we settled the desal issue many years ago. And as for toilet to tap, I don't know about how you anticipate to face that one down at your cocktail parties, but I'm sure it's going to be something that's going to be argued against pretty vigorously by health conscious Marin. And the final thought is, where do we get our filters? Are they manufactured like everything else in China? When we talk about all these filter systems that you got going in your thought and in your engineering plans, are we not making ourselves ever increasingly dependent upon China, if that's the case? And if it is the case, then I think they should be rejected out of hand until we can actually find domestic suppliers to provide this, so we don't find ourselves high and dry in some future sanctions game by the current administration or future ones. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe there are no more further comments.
Okay. I think we're done with the Crystal and Paul show. I kind of like Crystal and Paul. It has a nicer roll to it, but you guys can work that out. But thank you. And we're going to move on to our next agenda item. Item number 10, a resolution. Item 9, amendment number 1 to professional service agreement with Woodward and Curran.
Yeah, thanks. It's me again, President Schmidt. So tonight, we're seeking the board's, this is an approval item, we're seeking the board's authorization for the general manager to sort of finalize and execute amendment number 1 with Woodward and Curran to support the implementation of the roadmap projects. We brought Woodward and Curran on very soon after the board approved the roadmap at the end of February this year, and they've been helping us since that time put together the RFPs and to sort of think through the process and schedule that we've seen this evening. Woodard were selected in that way to get going on an early basis under the authorization of the general manager. We chose Woodard because one, they're not participating in the RFP process, but also because we have prior experience with them. They served in this capacity as program manager on the Intertie project, which if you cast your mind back was really a pretty significant achievement to get that design done in the time frame that we did under the circumstances that we did, and with all the different agencies that were participating in that effort. So they had a very good prior experience working with us. They're very knowledgeable about our water system. They're currently performing the master plan update. Their principal that's working with us is the former chief engineer for East Bay Mud. So he knows a little thing or two about dams and pipelines, which could come in handy for us specifically as we look to those projects ourselves. And then Woodard has also developed an earlier version of our hydrologic model for the reservoirs. So they have good information on our needs, our supply, and our distribution system as well. And crucially, they're going to provide an independent service. So they'll be looking at the Jacobs work that's been done. And we made a lot of assumptions in that process. And it'll be just a nice refresh for us to be able to take a look at some of those key assumptions before we jump into asking the board to make some decisions on some fairly significant roadmap projects. So with that kind of brief, I'd be happy to take any questions from the board.
I'll start left. Larry, any comments, questions? Jed?
Good.
Rajiv, Matt?
I have a couple of questions. Paul, leave your glasses on.
Yeah.
I actually am a little bit hung up on the scope. I know that we had initially brought them on. My understanding was for project management. But when I see them starting to do more rounds of modeling, and I know you referred to the need to calibrate imports from Sonoma with our storage so that, you know, we're as efficient as possible in reducing spillage. I get that. But when we start testing assumptions that came from the Jacobs study with respect to water supply availability and economic cost, it's frustrating that we're saying now that that study, which took over a year and was expensive, is based on assumptions that we're not so confident in. That's frustrating. The second is, are we going to gain more confidence from just additional modeling? I mean, there's a limit to the amount that we're going to improve on what was already done. And until I think I understand what it is that we're going to gain from additional rounds of modeling, I'm not comfortable with the scope of work.
Understood. Thanks for the question. I understand your frustration, and maybe I should have spent a little more time explaining the work that they're going to be doing. As you know, from what we just talked about, the consulting teams that will come on board will be looking at the alternatives and doing alternatives analysis. It's conceivable that we will have different volumes, which we talked about this evening, coming into storage, right, from Sonoma. It could be conceivable that we're looking at different reservoir storage volumes. And we need to understand how those are going to interplay with each other in tandem to support our water resiliency goals and by themselves. So there will be refinements to the cost through that process, but we will need to have refinements done to our model along the way as those projects take shape and change.
So maybe the right way, or one way to characterize it, it's not validating the assumptions, it's refining the assumptions based on the further work that's going to be done. It's a continued refinement based on the work that the consultants through the RFPs are going to do. In a way, we're looking to this contract to be kind of the the gatekeeper, so to speak, of all that information and ensuring that there's linkages between the different projects and that we're updating the key assumptions as those projects shift some of our thinking, which they probably will. We may find that this reservoir, 2,000 acre feet, we can increase this one 5, this one 10. How from a system does that affect the assumptions in terms of net water that would come in, that sort of thing? I don't know if that helps. We just recognize we don't know what we don't know yet, but there will be questions that arise from these efforts, and having support right there will allow us to keep moving quickly as gaps get filled in and we're ensuring consistency among the projects. I get the initial reaction to it's not, I don't believe, just double checking Jacob's work, and it may not be worded, I think, the best way. Maybe assuming depending how this discussion goes, we can refine that language a little better to really hit what the intention is.
Do we have any options of staggering some of those activities such that the further analysis of interplay between our different water supplies, between our reservoirs, might come after we have decisions about which reservoir we're going to be, which storage we're going to, be focusing on, the conveyance route that we're going to be using, whether or not we're going to be going through Stafford? Or some of this information so critical for making those decisions?
Yeah, there'll be a limited set that Woodard will be looking at in terms of modeling. So there'll be a number of different alternatives, and some of which we'll be able to screen out without modeling. But there'll be some, as you just noted, that may benefit from modeling to help us in the decision process.
I think, Ranjiv, I appreciate your question a lot, because the last thing we want to do is just do another consultant, another study, and kick the can down the road. But I don't think this board's going to do that. I don't think we're going to let the decisions get put off. We're going to be action oriented. And the reason why I'm supportive is because the staff is being clear about a timeline to start to implement some of these actions. And in order to do it, we need to get a lot deeper that Jacobs didn't. We need to get deeper in all of the different feasibility studies, and we're moving. So as long as they stick to the timeline and we keep the goals clear and we measure success against it, I'm fine with this budget item that's already in the budget.
No, I appreciate that. I just want to be, a good steward of our resources. And at some point, we don't learn any more from additional modeling. It may not be the case here, but that's been my observation in other instances. Maybe, Paul, then if we could, I know it's going to be too much technical detail for, say, every board meeting, or the strategic updates, the rapid updates that we're seeking regularly. But if we could have maybe dedicated sessions where, those of us that want to can really get it, get into the results of this further analysis, just to have that confidence that we are getting our money's worth out of the activity.
Absolutely, not just the results. I was imagining during the discussion what we would do similarly is the next update, really talking about the work that they're doing now and what's coming up. So the board really sees the work we're paying for, why we're doing it, and how it links to the overall goal. So we will bring that to the next update and get more granular on this work, because this is really one of the first ones that are moving forward now.
I also think we should bring the consultant in.
Yeah.
I would have had them here tonight.
They are in the audience.
Okay, well, I just think that, rather than us making the pitch, they should be making the pitch to us. So just as a comment, and I think it would help familiarize the board with them. I don't think I've ever met Zav. I mean, Zoom, but never in person. And I think it would be a good thing.
It'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do that. at-
They're local. I mean, it's not like it's a trip.
Right. And I just like to follow up. One, I appreciate the fact that there's a very specialized skill set that this company will bring to us, and the fact that we need further refinements. And I don't know if I'm still hung up on the fact that the Jacob study didn't get us further along than expected for the cost. Specifically when we're going to be paying, $40,000 to review their work as part of this contract. Although it is grant funded, and I appreciate that too, but I still, it would be a lot easier for me to be fully supportive if we understood, what does this get us? At this point, when this is done, when this money is spent, when their final presentations are done, where are we on the roadmap in terms of implementation, or where is it getting your staff to be? So that'd be clearer for me.
I'll just add in here. I share concern about seeing how this advances all the other contracts. This is there's a lot of information that would be developed here that would go and be, I think, very relevant to the other scopes of work that we're looking to initiate within the next number of months. So, and they will overlap. So I can understand if we're going to do this, it'll further refine our assumptions, our information, our costs, and then that gets fed to the consultants. That would make more sense stepwise. I don't understand quite how they will overlap and how there will be synergies and not duplication in that process. So I think that it would be, I think you can hear it. I can tell that we have a lot to do. It's not surprising that we need additional support. I understand that the analyses that we did to get us to this point were not the final studies. That's not the way this stuff works. The more we drill down, the higher resolution that we need. It costs more money. It takes more time to get to that higher resolution. So I'm not surprised that we do need to do further modeling. I just want to make sure that, to the point, I think, is that this is cost effective and that it's well integrated. This is a lot of studies to be initiating all at the same time, and it's going to take a lot of coordination to make sure that it's done effectively and efficiently. And not that we doubt that that our staff can't do that, but we haven't quite, I think, been told how this facilitates that kind of coordination.
I think there's a couple of things too. We're still in the measure twice, cut once. So I'm all for it. The other part of it is, I think it's more than facilitate, it's drive. That's the weakness I see in the whole where we are, is our ability to drive this thing to a conclusion. And that's where Woodard and Kern fits in. Ben and I have had extended conversations about this. And that's the key issue of moving this thing forward. It's not modeling or doing the evaluation. It is looking at the data, making a decision, and getting out of the indecision is the key to flexibility mode. That's the key. And that's what they do.
I mean, I fully appreciate that, Larry. So as long as we, are not embarking on modeling exercises that are not directly linked to driving those decisions, that's all good. And I'm sure there are critical modeling exercises that will drive those decisions, but everything, I'm stating the obvious, Paul, but it just jumps out at me, that it feels a little repetitive with some of it feels repetitive with what's already been done. But I get the bigger picture. So I'll stop.
I'll add one last point on it, which is I've never seen a consulting firm be what drives decision-making. Consultants work for a client, and we are the client, and our communities are the clients. And so what will drive us forward will be the staff and the board. And I think it's upon us. So I don't feel comfortable handing the onus of that off onto anybody but ourselves. But that being said, I think that that we're obviously paying a lot of attention to this, and I believe that we will move forward in a really constructive way because we're paying that much attention to it. So I don't want to hold this up. I'm willing to support this going forward. But I do think that when we come back on our regular meetings, I think it would be very, very important to have Woodward and Kern be part of those monthly updates, and probably can guess from the conversation of the board tonight that there's going to be a lot of questions to continue to see how the scope of work is facilitating and being part of how we use it to drive things forward. Any other board comments? Okay, so this is a decision. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Harry, could we have a roll call vote?
Public comment.
Oh, sorry, I'm
We
sorry.
have
Yeah,
one
public comment.
speaker, Mr. Ed Jamison. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Jamison.
You muted?
I've unmuted him. Okay, we'll get back to him. Mr. Roger Roberts. Mr. Roger Roberts.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm sorry, did you hear me?
well, okay, hold on. Let me. Okay, go
Hello?
ahead, Mr. Jamison and then Mr. Roger Roberts. Go ahead, Mr. Jamison.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I'm sorry for that. I got disconnected. I may have missed something, but I believe Woodward Current is needed to refine the RFPs that front end all the work and to coordinate the many concurrent studies. As for modeling, it sounds like that's to be done down the road a ways. I believe we need Woodward Current to move us forward expeditiously. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Roger Roberts. I can hear you, Mr. Roger Roberts.
Yes.
Yes.
It doesn't surprise me that you've got an overlay of study by a separate entity to understand the work that's been already done and where there are gaps. It's not uncommon for project analysis and costs to require further refinement. And it's clear that we do not know what the final costs are going to be, and Woodward and Curran can help us understand where those costs will be and for what reasons. So I think it makes absolute sense to have Woodward and Curran overseeing the work and making sure that we refine the costs. That's all normal in project development and understanding what you're getting for your money at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larry Minikes.
In regard to the Jacob study, I think from the beginning, the roadmap was made very clear to the public where the Jacob study was going to take us. The only thing that changed was the timing on the roadmap, allowing the new board to actually make those decisions and accept the report. But I feel that Jacobs took us where we expected it to go, knowing that the next step was then to look at these projects and go on, get down on the ground and see what it's going to take. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, now could we have a roll call vote?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that moves us on to item number 10, resolution waiving minor bid irregularities and awarding a multi-year tree maintenance contract to the Professional Tree Care Company.
Good evening, directors. Darren Machado, Operations Director. Mark Kadeen is going to present this contract.
Good evening, Board of Directors. My name is Mark Kadeen. I'm the Superintendent of System Maintenance and Support Services here at Marin Water. I'm here to present a new tree maintenance contract number 2004 for approval. Currently, the district is in contract with the tree maintenance company set to expire on June 30th of this year. District staff would like to continue utilizing the services of a tree maintenance company as they provide essential services that help protect and maintain district facilities and watershed lands. Most of the work performed by the tree contractor requires specialized skills and equipment to avoid damage to property and to safely perform the work. Examples of some of the skills and equipment are safe removal of large diameter trees, usually requiring climbing of the trees, topping of trees, limbing of trees, all while, again, climbing the trees. Safe removal of trees deemed to be hazardous, such as dead trees, trees that have been infested and need to be removed and present a possible fire hazard. Other trees needed to be removed would be storm damaged, such as trees that have fallen on district sites, access roads to tank sites, pump stations, dams. And the use of equipment that we don't have in our fleet, such as large crane operations, the use of aerial lifts, and the work performed around power lines, both energized and de-energized. To be able to perform that function safely and proficiently is definitely a benefit to this contract. Let's see here. District staff in the facilities maintenance department utilizes these services on a on-call basis, usually emergency work related, most of it. During winter storms, trees go down, district representative goes out and establishes what is needed to assess the down tree. Could be caught in a power line, could be on a pump station, could be on the water tank. The use of this contract and the utilization of a tree maintenance contractor allows district staff to perform the work needed for the district sites. And it's usually about 80% of the tree maintenance work that is performed at district facility sites is performed by a tree maintenance contractor. Up on the watershed, district staff utilizes services for fuel reduction work to reduce wildfire fuels, forest restoration, and hazardous tree management. The work performed on the watershed helps execute the district's biodiversity, fire, and fuels integrated plan, otherwise known as the BIFIT. To go into a couple of the bids within this contract. So the initial lowest bid submitted was rejected and deemed unresponsive by district staff. The reason for this was because they submitted their cost for bid item number 1 for normal tree work and bid item number 2, emergency tree work, which are 2 main functions in this contract that get utilized the most, based on their numbers per worker per hour, as opposed to actual unit prices stated in the bid to be submitted. Turns out that a company called the Professional Tree Care Company was determined to be the lowest responsible bidder for this contract by district staff. Even though they initially submitted, they did not submit addendum number 1 with which clarified what contractor licensing a contractor performing the tree maintenance work described in this contract shall possess. The Professional Tree Care Company, however, does in fact possess the required licensing mentioned in the addendum number 1 to perform this work described in this contract, and did eventually submit that addendum number 1 shortly after the submittal of their bid. The new contract would be set up like the current contract for 3 years, guaranteed, with the option to extend the contract for 2 years, year by year, similar to work we've done in the past with this contract. The pricing for the extensions for the 2 additional years would not be increased more than the current CPI at that time, the consumer price index at that time, which is not that much. They have a complete set of equipment to perform this work related to the contract. They got a complete set of staff able to perform this work. And district staff has also reached out to references about this company, because this company is a different company than we currently have. And all revealed good results about their quality of work and their safety.
Where are they based?
I
Roughly.
don't,
East Bay or?
I want to say East Bay. East Bay.
Thanks.
The recommended action would be to approve a resolution waiving the minor bid irregularities such as the addendum that was not signed during the submittal of their bid, and award the contract number 2004 to the Professional Tree Care Company in the amount of $744,000 and $744,835.
And thank you for your patience.
Yeah,
You
thank
should
you.
have said something. We'd have pushed it up in the agenda.
That's fine. I don't know
Okay.
if I'm as good as the Crystal and Paul show, but
They're tougher to follow.
shorter.
Yeah. Okay, board comments.
Do you anticipate a protest from the low bid?
I do not. They actually rescinded their own bid.
Okay.
Thanks again for sticking around for 4 hours for us. And I know you get a long commute back to Sonoma, as do many of our employees. So
worries.
much appreciated. Good work. I'm supportive.
Thanks for the report.
Yep. All good. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Yeah, public comment.
There are none.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Terry, can we get a vote?
Yes, Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith, and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, that brings us to item agenda.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
good.
Oh, okay. The next item is mine, and it's just a rehash of basically the staff report that there are two committee meetings next week. Thursday, June 15th, the Watershed Committee meeting at 1:30. Friday, June 16th is the Operation Committee meeting at 9:30 a.m. The following week, Tuesday, June 20th, is our regular bi-monthly meeting. A external meeting, the only one I have is June 11th through the 14th is the American Water Works Association Annual Conference in Ontario. And I heard earlier today about a Las Galinas. That was the first I heard, so I apologize. It's not on the staff report. If someone wants to.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And
Go ahead. I'm
oh,
sorry.
go ahead. And that's all I have.
I just wanted to let the board know that in accordance with expressed interest from the board, at the end of the agenda, we have upcoming items for future board meetings indicating June 20th will be our budget adoption workshop. And we'll carry that kind of similar with key items in committees as well, pointing out upcoming key items for the board and the public's attention.
I'm a little surprised you haven't heard about it. We're not speaking at it because.
Yeah.
We are.
We are.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's June 8th, 9 to 11 at the McGinnis Park at the restaurant.
That's all I have. And I do have a public comment. If I may.
Sure.
Go ahead, Mr. Phil Sauter.
Really quickly, I know that Director Sansom and Director Schmidt were at the recent Lagunitas TAC committee meeting and heard the Eric Ettlinger's report, the Spawner report that talks about how well the fish are doing. This was I've been attending these meetings for about 5 years, and I've never heard such an optimistic report as to the number of smolts that are heading out to the ocean this year. I don't think it got quite to the NOAA level for, they have a certain level at which they consider the fish endangered and a certain level above which they're not. But this is the first time it really approached that level. So I think that the board and the district really should be commended on the way that they're taking care of the creeks. I know there's a school of thought that says we should be capturing every drop of water and using it in our reservoirs for humans, but sometimes, just there are other species in this watershed, and I think it's really a tribute to the district as to how well it's taking care of the creek. And I just thought if those TAC meetings are hard to get to, and they're 3 hours long, but it might be helpful sometime to invite Eric to one of the board meetings or one of the other committee meetings, just to give an overview of how the fish are doing in the creek. It's an important part of what the district does.
That's a great comment. That was always done before. And I think it'd be something, it's a ways to
I
pick
think
up.
we're going to brief on during the watershed meeting next week on the 15th too.
Great.
So
Yeah, but I think it would be great on some regular occurrence, especially when we have some really great data like that to have. If Eric, I'm sure adding another evening event for his schedule is not always easy, but it'd be great to have that kind of an update at an actual board meeting. Okay, with that, we are adjourned.